Right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here with Beau, or Beau is here with me, and we're going to be doing a big deep dive, the Dune mega review, or Dune mega review, all things Dune, basically. So yeah, let's get into it, I guess. From the books to the movies, where do you want to start, or the
Yeah, I've
inspiration behind the books?
I've got a lot to say about this. It's one of my favourite things. Yeah, I thought we could talk about. Obviously, June 2 has just come out. For anyone that's watching
Yeah,
this years down the line on the old internet, June 2 has just come out in the spring of 2024, and so yeah, I'd love to talk about Frank Herbert and the original novel. Maybe we could touch at least on the David Lynch 1984 version, and then the two Denis Villeneuve films, and
yes,
just
that's
talk all
it.
about it. I also want to mention here or there Lawrence of Arabia or Seven Pillars of Wisdom, because I think there's
Mm,
many layers to this we can talk about. There's obviously the original thing, the Frank Herbert novel. Then there's
mm.
the movies. But there'll be lots of people, or there are already lots of people that have done reviews on all that sort of thing. I'd like to add, if I can, another layers within layers, and talk about Seven Pillars of Wisdom as well. But yeah, I mean, where do you want to start?
Well, so I watched Dune Part Two a little bit before you, didn't I? And then you watched it. I think you watched it about a week after I had.
Yeah, which is still a
I
couple of
think
weeks
judging
ago
on the
now. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think I mean let's start with let's start with the two new movies and sort of a broad review of them, and then go to the books. And you have to forgive me, long time. My knowledge on the books are not great at the moment, so I'm going to let you sort of do the heavy lifting there. But what did you think? What did you think of Dune Part Two?
I thought it was absolutely brilliant. Now, I'm actually quite a harsh critic. I don't say that about many things ever. In fact, in the last few years, good few years, the only things I can say on TV or film that I've genuinely thought was superb, sort of blown over by, is June 1 and June 2.
Mm,
Chernobyl. I don't know if you saw that TV series, Chernobyl.
yeah.
I thought that was superb. I've rewatched that about 5 times. And also, to a slightly lesser extent, but still thought was absolutely superb, was Blade Runner 2049, which is also Villeneuve, isn't it?
Okay. Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah,
And
yeah.
they're the only things that I've really thought were bordering on masterful. And as for June, June 1 and 2, I really like them. But this is one of the things I would say is that there's a special place in my heart for the original novel.
Mm,
And I first read it, I've read it 4 times now, and I reread it in the last couple of weeks for this. I first read it when I was about Paul's age, when I was about 16 or 17, and Paul's
mm.
15 when the book opens, and he was about 18 by the end of the book. So I was about his age, and I didn't even get it all really. I reread it again when I was in my, must have been mid to late 20s, and really got it quite a lot more at that point. And I reread it again in my early 30s, and like I say, for the fourth time now in the last couple of weeks. And so it's sort of got a special place in my heart. As I say, it's for me, it's the best sci-fi universe. It's better
Mm.
than the Warhammer 40k universe. It's better than the Star Wars universe. I've read quite a lot of sci-fi. It's the best universe for me. Uh, so
Yeah.
one other thing I'd say before you go um, is to say that I've read lots of books, and then they make a film out of it, and then you watch the film. That nearly always works for me, even if the screenwriter and the film have butchered the book. That's great. The other way around never works for me. I've only had it a few times where I've seen the film, then I've tried to read the book. That never works. It's really crap. It's really crap when you do that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
For me,
That's
anyway, it never ever works. But the other way around is great. So even as I say, even the David Lynch version, I still quite liked it. And one last
mm,
thing I would say about this is that I implore anyone out there that hasn't yet seen June 1 or June 2, read the first novel first, if you can. It's not that short of a novel, but it's a page turner. It's easy enough to read,
mm.
even if it's a bit confusing, but it's a page turner. Read the book first, then see the movies, because it will be so much richer. They already as standalone movies, brilliant. But if you've
Mm.
read the book, there's something like magical. Well, that's my opinion anyway. What do you think?
Yeah, what? Well, I mean, that's interesting because so. Oh, I guess there's going to be a fair amount of jumping around, I guess, in this discussion, isn't there? Because that just a broad stroke opinion of the movies there and a little bit of the book, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of people, there's a lot of chatter saying some of the changes with respect to Dune Part Two, sort of motivational characters, Chani. Um, some people didn't like stuff like that. So should we talk about some of the changes
Hmm.
and then sort of address that? And because it's interesting to say that I mean, my opinion of Doom, I love Doom Part Two. I thought it was a great film. It was an absolute superb film. I really liked Dune. I thought Dune Part One was a good film. I thought it was decent, beautifully shot,
Hmm.
technically superb, great. There were some things which were lacking here and there, like the music, for instance. Dune Part One, I thought the score was a little bit lackluster, which I know people disagree on. I'm not blind to that, and I do feel people say it didn't feel like a complete film. It wasn't. Like, it was literally not a complete film. So
Hmm.
some of the detractor elements of the film are not actually its fault because it's part of how they're adapting a bigger story. But I really liked it. That all that said, and then they build on it with Doom Part Two. Doom Part Two is exponentially better in every single way. The score was superb, so beautifully done. Everything worked for me. Everything worked for me in that film.
Hmm.
I don't think, because again, it's been a few weeks now since I've watched it. I don't think there was anything that I personally pulled up as, oh, I didn't really like this, or it all just sort of worked. It all culminated um, in a great sci-fi experience, which you know is so rare today in the sort of caped crusader world that we have in theatres nowadays. It was so nice to sit there and get truly lost in a world for quite a
Hmm.
while, because you do get lost in it, and it's so immersive and so unlike anything that we have. And you're also asked, as the audience, just go along with it. It's not, you're not spoon fed. It's, this is the world. We're here. Enjoy it. You're here for the ride. And what a ride it was. Doom Part Two,
Hmm.
brilliant, great film, really, really good.
Yeah, so obviously, sort of the cinematography, kind of obviously, it looks brilliant, really, really, really good. I mean, among the best I've
Mm.
seen in a long time, perhaps ever. I don't want to overgild the lily, but it looks very, 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 very good. The score. Do you know what? I'm one of those people that I'm afraid don't really pay that much attention to a score. If it's blindingly good, I'll notice it. Otherwise, it's just
Mm.
one of those things. I'm much more interested in story, plot, narrative, dialogue, acting, that sort of thing. But nonetheless, still, it stood out. It was Zimmer, wasn't it? Isn't it? It's
No, I think it
is it
was
not?
Bjorn Jorgensen. I
Well,
think it might have
anyway,
been Zimmer. It's one of the two. For
anyway, the score was good. It sort of did. I did sort of notice it for being good. But yeah, as for it being immersive, so June 1 and June 2, the films, are just the first novel. There are many, many novels in the June saga. And so the first two of these films, I think there's going to be a third one. The first two films are just the first novel. Okay. Now,
Mm.
um, and it reflects the novel very, very accurately, almost scene for scene. But they do chop it around and change it a bit, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the book starts off quite slow. There's no action really for like the first third maybe of the book. And June 1 is about the first third of the book. It's not half and half. It's not 50-50.
Mm.
So the fact that June 1 is a lot slower in pace and in all sorts of respects, it's slow. It's quite a slow film. Now, I was already on board, being a June fan already. So that didn't bother me. But if you come to it cold and you're expecting some sort of high octane action filled thing, you're not really going to get that much with June 1. But now June 2, just like the novel, is much more action packed. Um, and and so that, yeah, there's a lot more to it, and they had to fit a lot more in. I mean, it's not a short film, June 2, is it? Or was it like 2 hours
Mm.
40 odd, something like that?
Yeah,
It
2 hours,
whizzed
2 hours
by
40,
for
2 hours
me. It whizzed
45.
by for me. Now, say a few words about what they changed. Um, yeah, also, well, things off the top of my mind. I hope, like I say, I watched it about 2 weeks ago now, roughly, and so I hope I can remember the things they changed. Well, the big one is that in the book, um, um, is it Alia, Paul's little sister, is
Mm.
born in the book, and she takes part in and grows up super quickly, like almost magically quickly, superhumanly
Yeah.
quickly. She grows up, and so she actually takes part in events at the end by the end of the story. And in the film, she's still unborn. Also, there's a big jump in time, about 2/3 of the way through the first novel. It just skips ahead about 3 years. Paul's supposed to be 15. They say a number of times he's 15, and then about, as I say, about 2/3 of the way through the book, he's sort of suddenly 18, and they mention that 3 years have passed. In the film, they don't do that. It's supposed, the whole film takes place over just a few months. You're given the impression,
Mm.
something like that at most. So they're the big things. A few other things. There's a few characters they miss out, like the Count Fenring. You don't see the Count Fenring. You see his wife in it that Fade Ruffer sleeps with, which also isn't in the novel. Austin Butler sleeps with her apparently. None of that's in the novel. The Beast Raban, Big Dave Batista. You don't see his death in the novel. It takes
Mm.
place off screen or off page, so to speak. It's just mentioned that he's been killed, whereas they actually show you it. They show Gurney Halleck killing him in the film, so that's different. There's another big character, the Baron Harkonnen's Mentat, Piter de Vries. He's a great character, really brilliant character, really, really horrible and evil in the novel, which just isn't
Disappeared.
in. I don't think
Part
is he
two.
in June 1. I don't think you see him in
He
June
is.
1. Oh,
Yeah,
you
he's in
do.
Dune 1.
Oh, yeah, you
Yeah.
do. It's been
And then he's
about
just sort
a
of
year since seen
gone.
June 1, I'm afraid. But yeah, his death. They show you his death
Mm.
and stuff. I can't remember his in June 1. It's been. I should have rewatched June 1, but I watched June 1 twice, but both about a year ago now or so. I think it must have been.
Yeah, he's
Uh,
only in Dune 1, he's only shown, I think he's shown in like 2 scenes in Dune 1, but then in Dune 2 he's just gone, like he's not shown. The Mentats on a whole are actually just entirely left out. They're just
mm,
not
mm,
there, which
mm,
is
mm.
I don't know, a
There's
creative
a
choice maybe.
I suppose so. Yeah, I suppose screenwriting is a whole different thing to novel writing, and I don't know the
Mm.
secrets or the magic to what makes a good screenplay. But the screenplay was still brilliant, I think. Like I say, once I've read the novel and I know the novel, I know that what the original thing is. I don't
Mm.
mind that much if a screenwriter buggers about with it, as long as they're not, really taking the Mickey, which I don't think they are in this. Is in most respects, it's very, very faithful to the original novel. What other quick things? There's you see a big scene on Gidi Prime, don't you? The Harkonnen homeworld. There's like a whole
Mm.
section of the film on Gidi Prime, and you
Yeah.
see Fade Ruther in the fighting arena. That's only mentioned in the novel, almost in passing, or it's mentioned a couple of times. There's not a big long descriptive scenes of it or anything like that in the novel, so
Mm.
that's different. Couple other quick things. There's a lot in the novel which they can't really put on screen unless you're just going to have massive amounts of voiceover or something, or massive amounts of sort of crowbarred in exposition. It's a really deep, complicated story, the novel, and they just can't, with the best will in the world, with the best storytellers
Mm.
and lots of time at their disposal, they can't put it all in a movie. But they still do a very good job of it, I think. Duncan Idaho is quite a big character in the novel, and I think you see him, or he's mentioned. You do see him, yeah. He's that merman guy. You see him
Yeah.
in June 1 for a bit. What's his name? What's the actor's name? He's very famous. I can't remember his
Jason
name.
Momoa.
Yeah. He's
Yeah.
Duncan
He's
Idaho. He's a
not.
really big character in the novel, and not in the film, really. They're the
Yeah.
main big things. I'll probably think of other things as we go along.
Well, so navigators, they're
Yeah. The Guild. Yeah. Now, the Guild plays a big part. In the first novel, the Guild is referenced and mentioned quite a lot, but they never explain it. That's left for later novels.
mm.
But yeah, also the Chone Company. So the Spacing Guild, or just the Guild, are in charge of all space flight, all space travel. They've got a monopoly on that.
Mm.
And then there's the Chone Company, which are sort of in charge of all sort of commerce and business and banking, and the actual the business of dealing in spice. And
Mm.
again, in the first novel, then it's not really all explained very much at all. But they're there, and it's not really. I don't think it's really mentioned in the films hardly at all, is it?
No,
There
I
you
don't think
go.
they get a mention at all. Actually,
Mm,
uh,
mm,
I'd have to. No, I don't think they're mentioned. No,
mm.
no, I don't think
There's
they're
too
mentioned
many
at all.
layers. It's already a complicated. The films. It's already quite packed in
Yes.
and quite complex.
Well,
So
I
they've
think,
obviously made the decision to sort of not overcomplicate it.
yeah, I mean, so yeah, from a writing perspective, I think that's smart because they're, you know, you are dealing with quite a lot. It's from a filmmaking perspective, it's where do you put your primary focus on narrative wise. So I think that makes sense in terms of the changes that they did, or at least, not mentioning certain bits and pieces. I think it makes sense from a narrative perspective because people just go, "Well, what's that then?" And then it wouldn't really
Mm,
come back up again. But it would
mm,
obviously, in a series of books and things like that, it pops back up a little bit quicker. So,
mm,
movies obviously with the length of time to be made, even if they do get made, sequels and stuff. So, yeah.
mm,
And then, yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it, that they chose to do the inverse or the direct opposite of what they do in the novel with respect to his little sister, right? Dune Part Two, just not born, just
mm,
communicating from beyond the womb, and then
mm,
and then
mm,
in the novel grows up really quickly. Like it's like that. I think that was an interesting choice. I wonder why. I wonder
mm.
what sort of thoughts you have that they went around doing. Uh, any thoughts on that? Sort of
Yeah, I
reasoning
mean,
why?
yeah, I think it must be simply because it would make things overly complicated because I mean they hint at it, but Jessica, the Lady Jessica, um, played by the delicious Rebecca Ferguson. I'm absolutely in love with her. I think she's beautiful. She has. There's a great thread through the novel about how she can communicate with Alia in the womb, all to do with the waters of
Mm,
life. And then Paul, once he gets his prescience, he can communicate with her before she's born, and then even after she's born, they've got some sort of telepathy going on with each other. I mean,
mm,
so in the bigger story of June, she plays a massive part. I mean, she's Saint Alia of the Knife. She plays a massive role. I won't bother talking about what happens in the second and third novels and onwards because it's sort of too big, sort
mm.
of it's sort of too mind-numbingly big. But yeah, I think it must have been the whole Alia thing. It must have been just a conscious decision not to overcomplicate things because she's in the Lynch 1984 version, isn't she? You see her
Yeah,
in that, and she's in
yeah,
that and
yeah.
everything. But yeah, where Paul's character and Paul's ability to sort of see through time and all that sort of thing, that's already complicated. Then they already struggled to sort of show that. So to
I think
throw a
they.
lead there as well, it would have
Yeah.
been. Mm,
I think they did a relatively good job actually at establishing um, Paul's Paul's sort of abilities in a way which didn't seem sort of campy, and sort of a bit
mm,
cliche. I think they did a
mm,
relatively good job because, from an artistic perspective, creatively, that they're also trying to skirt around being referenced to superhero abilities as well. Because if that's the norm in theaters at the moment, it would be what immediately generally would come to mind, or
mm,
Star
mm,
Wars, I guess.
mm.
And I think they did a really good job of establishing his sort of abilities and the like, without it coming across cheesy. I think they managed to do everything. To be fair, what did you? So here's a
Oh,
question: What did you
sorry,
think of?
sorry. Just one quick thing to say about Aaliyah
Oh
is
yeah,
you
yeah,
do see her in one of his sort of dreamlike states when she's grown up. There's one bit. Do you remember?
mm,
He's having
yes,
some sort of dream, and there's oceans on
on the
June, and
sand,
she's
I think.
grown up. She's
Mm.
grown up, and you see her sort of elfin face on screen very,
Yes,
very
Anya,
briefly.
played by Anya Taylor Joy.
Mm, mm.
Yeah, I
So
think
it's,
I
it
think
is
yeah.
mentioned. Sorry, you was going to ask me a specific question?
Yeah, so I was going to say, what did you think of Baron Harkonnen and I guess the sort of subtleties they went around his grotesqueness because
Mm,
you know what he is in the novel and what he is, for those that have watched it in sort of the '84 movie as well, is very very much like the most evil type of gross person there is. It's a direct. I mean, there's direct references to. I don't know how to phrase it. To be fair, doing gross things, degenerate things with people.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know how to phrase it in a way.
So in these 2020 films, it's Stellan Skarsgård, isn't it?
Yeah.
Brilliant actor who's actually in Chernobyl as well. He's a brilliant actor. No one would doubt that for a moment. He plays the Baron superbly, in my opinion. And so, yeah, in the book, he is described as sort of one of the most disgusting humans it's sort of possible to be. Really, really fat, but also just ugly and really, really gross in every way physically. And then, like, and just as a person, like a terrible, terrible, sadistic psychopath type, and just to say, it's some sort of a paedophile, a pederast. It seems like he likes little boys.
That's what I was skirting around that.
There's no. It's not. Herbert never says it as explicitly as that, but it's noted once or twice that he's got a predilection for pretty boys. Now, back in the 60s when it was written, you probably couldn't get away with that now because people say, well, what's wrong with that? Stop judging. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But
modern day.
Anyone that's normal obviously knows that is perverse and sort of morally wrong. And so Frank Herbert wrote that into the original thing. There is one bit actually in Dune 2 where Fade Ruther, or is it Raban, comes into I think it's Fade Ruther, he comes into the Baron's chamber and there's just sort of two dead bodies in the corner.
Yes.
And it doesn't really mention it. But that is in the book a few times that the Baron and the Nar Baron, Fade Ruther, as just part of their evening's entertainment, they'll just sort of have their way with a few slaves and kill them, murder them. And that's their fun. That's their evening. That's sort of how dark and horrible they're supposed to be. And then throw on top of that for the Baron himself that he's sort of pitiless and, as I say, sadistic, like genuinely loves to hurt people emotionally and physically. So he's just sort of an arch baddie. And as bad as he is, sort of Darth Vader bad, it's never really over the top. You sort of buy into it. It's not sort of comic book bad where you're like, oh, really? He's murdered 1 million people. Yeah. No, it's sort of real, you buy into the realistic nastiness of him. And also that idea of plans within plans within plans that that the Baron's capable of. In the book, it says something like a masterpiece of revenge or something like that, that he's very, very calculating. And Stellan Skarsgård does a great job of it. And the descriptions in the novel go on and on and on.
It's interesting. So having just watched the 84 version up until about 3/4 of the way, it's all I had time for today. But it is interesting the sort of depiction of the Baron in the 84 version. It's definitely of its time. I mean, the sort of big floating gas suit and things like that. It's definitely of its time. But the sort of pedophilia aspect and his sort of sadistic sort of sexual gratuity that he gets out of murdering people is really explicit and quite disgusting.
And don't they show him, if memory serves, don't they show him physically diseased and sort of corruption on his face and stuff, which they don't do with Stellan, do they?
No, so that's one of the first introductions to the Baron. Is he's sat in a room. I think they did a really good job actually of Harkonnens. It's Gede Prime, Gede Prime, isn't it? They did a really good job of showing that, I think, actually in the 84 version. Again, it's of its time, great sort of practical sets and things like that, and miniatures, but really, really good, like very industrious, very industrial. And then again, contrast that to what they showed in the modern day. Dune, it's interesting where the sort of artistic elements went, but I think both work. One of its time, one more sort of sci-fi aspect. But yeah, so anyway, going back to that is the first introduction. Is he's in this room and he's got these doctors around him. One's working on him and sort of almost injecting him. It looks like they're injecting him with sort of disease and things like that, because he's sort of pumping a syringe, and I don't know if I don't know. It might be pulling stuff out, might be putting stuff in because it's the Baron. Logic would be probably putting stuff in, to be honest. But yeah, really gross, big pustules, big sort of holes in his flesh, and real nasty, real nasty. But then yeah, subsequently in that scene, because Fade and Raban, that's their introduction into that scene as well in the movie, and then he sees a pretty boy that's bringing flowers to this room, which is, I always thought that was a bit odd. Gidi Prime and there's flowers there. It didn't really add up to me, but never mind. And then he floats over to this guy, and because that's the thing that they have in that movie, they got heart plugs, which that's not in the novel. The sort of way to murder people randomly. There's these heart plugs. So he popped this heart plug out, and then sort of indulges this sort of sexual gratuitous element of this little boy's death. Really quite gross, but yeah, interesting. But it's point of saying it's fascinating to see the two comparisons. One, modern day now, and then the sort of one back in '84. But they both work. But they're both different facets to it. So Skarsgård does a really good, cold, calculating, very, very almost meticulously planned all of these events. Really sort of, a tactician. He's a strategist. Sort of got all of this whole thing laid out before him. He knows what he's doing, and very evil with it, commanding power. And then this other one in the '84, it's almost like a mad power. People are indulging in his fantasies because they're just like, oh my god, what is this guy going to do next? But they both actually work, I guess, in the regard of an adaptation from the novel, because they're seemingly facets of the same character that born them out. That would be my sort of observation there. I don't know, because a while since you watched it, so
yeah, no, I mean, I've seen it a couple of times, and so one of the things, the '80s version has got a bit of a reputation for being really bad, or people that love the novel were like really, really upset by the '80s version because, well, apart from anything else, Carl McLachlan is way too old to be Paul. He's like 30 or something stupid. Paul's supposed to be a boy, and not just a boy.
Comical.
He's supposed to look young for his age. People are surprised that he's 15. He looks small and young for a 15-year-old. So that's what Paul is supposed to be, at least at the beginning. So that's sort of cast poorly. And then there's loads of things that they miss out and don't explain in the '80s version, where if you didn't know the novel, it just wouldn't make any sense. It just wouldn't hardly make any sense, especially the last third of it or so, which is a fair enough criticism. However, I still think there are loads of good things in the '80s one, loads of really, really good things about it. But there's one last thing I suppose to say about the Baron, his depiction, is that again, nowadays you would call it fat shaming or ableism or something. The idea that if you're disgustingly obese, that reflects directly that something morally wrong with you. Right? Right. If you're so fat that you need like special levitator things in order to move around, or like a mobility scooter, if you need that, then in your inner core you're wrong. You're evil. There's something black and wrong with you. Like, again, it's quite of its time, quite 60s thing to, no one would blink an eye at that back in the day. But nowadays it's a bit less okay hilarious to do that. But, that's what it is. That is what it is. A couple of things I would say about, so I'd like to get my criticisms out of the way, because I've got one or two small ones.
Yeah.
So if we get that out of the way, and then I can just gush endlessly about everything else. So first of all, I'd like to say, before I get to my criticism, some of the other criticisms I've seen, like on Twitter and stuff,
Are we talking about Dune Part Two?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
okay,
Which I don't
yeah, okay,
think's fair.
interesting. Yeah.
One big one I saw um, was that there's this idea that all the baddies are white, sort of porcelain white, and all the goodies you're supposed to root for are brown people, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I
Right.
guess. Yeah.
I just think that's nonsense. I saw
Mm,
someone I highly respect, Tom Rosells, if I have the drive. I highly respect that man.
mm,
I'm privileged that I've had a conversation or two with him, but that was that was basically his take on Twitter. Now I feel that's completely unfair. That's the story is so much more than that.
well,
It's so much bigger and deeper and rich and
what?
complex that to reduce it to that, or that you hate Timothy Chalamet, that in real life the actor Timothy Chalamet is like some sort of like globo homo sort of weirdo queen type freak dude, and
Yeah.
then
He's a,
because
he's a bit of a metrosexual.
yeah, let's call it that. But and so that ruins the whole film for you. No. The story, Frank Herbert's story, is
Mm,
a gem. It's extremely rich. It's up there for me
mm,
with actual scripture. It's up there
yeah.
in a way. The story of Paul Atreides is on a par as a story with that of Moses or Jesus or Muhammad. It's that level. It's that deep. It's
Mm,
that rich. It really is. Well, in fact, it's bigger in a sense because Muad'Dib ends up spanning the universe.
yeah.
So to reduce it to the goodies are white, the goodies are brown, and the baddies are white,
Mm.
and therefore I don't like it. Mm,
Well, but it's also
I won't really have that. I don't think.
it's also wrong, I guess, on a technical perspective. It's almost it's a bit of a blinkered view of the story because technically, I mean, he goes on to basically genocide and wage war across the. I mean, most people don't consider that good, you know. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
on what
uh,
perspective is he good? I guess on that level, then.
yeah, yeah. We'll get to the jihad, the
Which they
universe-wide
didn't
jihad in a
say.
bit, but
They
there were
didn't
there
call
were
it that.
there were no, they didn't use the word jihad, did they?
Mm.
There's
I did
references to
notice that.
there are yeah, it does sort of hint at it, doesn't it? But in the novel, it's quite explicit a number of times. But I'll get to that in a bit later. So that's the main
Yeah, yeah.
criticism I've seen online, which I didn't agree with. Now, my personal criticisms, I've only got a couple, and they are nitpicky, and they're probably very personal ones. Although I did
It's all
see
fair.
Mark Commode agree with one of mine, and I despise Mark Commode, but he happened to have the same take as me on one of them, which is Christopher Walken.
Okay, what?
Christopher,
Okay, what? So I
yeah,
have an issue, sort of, but
Christopher
it'll be
Walken.
interesting to hear what you think.
Well, obviously, he's a superb actor, one of the greatest guys ever to do it.
Mm.
I'm not saying he's not, but he plays it pretty much as Christopher Walken. He has his voice.
Yeah, same thing.
He has his hair. It's Christopher
Yeah,
Walken,
yeah.
the
So that was
emperor.
my issue.
The emperor of the universe, Shaddam the Fourth, is Christopher Walken. It just jars a bit. It would have been
Yeah,
nice if they could have got an unknown actor. It might have been nice, or someone that exudes sort of an imperial gravitas, right?
yeah.
Christopher
Mads
Walken,
Mikkelsen.
maybe, but even then, it would for me. I would have liked someone an unknown, really.
Mm.
But nonetheless, despite saying that, Christopher Walken, he doesn't ruin it.
Yeah,
It's just the Emperor's Walken. Okay.
yeah.
Um, the other main criticism I had is about Chani. Um,
Okay.
in the book, she's not really annoying at all. She's not
Mm.
really she doesn't really talk back to Paul much or create a problem around herself. She's there for him to serve him. She worships him as Muad'Dib, as a Lisan al Gaib as much as anybody else. Whereas in the
Mm.
movie, they make her sort of a bit annoying, to be quite honest, and
Yeah.
she sort of she's a bit of a hassle for him in some ways, or anyway. So they did that for some reason, and I think they're the only two things I sort of could really point to, and they're actually quite minor things, to be honest. Neither of them come anywhere close to ruining the film for me. What
But
about
do you
you?
think then? Well, so I mean, I agree with the Christopher Walken aspect. I mean, it doesn't annoy me. I will say this: I was really excited when he was announced. I was like, "That's brilliant! That is inspired casting. Haven't seen him in anything for ages. He's such a great actor. That will be amazing." And yeah, I mean, he was literally just Christopher Walken. I
Mm,
was expecting him to at least ham it up a little bit. You know, that would
mm,
have been nice.
mm,
Um, and even the clothing was a bit was underwhelming for for the emperor, but it didn't ruin it remotely. It was one of those things because although his presence is big and he's important, it's almost inconsequential to the overall movie. So he sort of
mm,
came and he went, and I was
mm,
like, okay, fine, like sure.
mm,
It's a bit of a missed opportunity, but it didn't affect the quality of the film overall. Um,
mm,
and then yeah, so with Chani, it's interesting, isn't it? Because yeah, you're right. Like she she is essentially a very dutiful follower to Paul, and I do wonder what they're trying to set up with that, where they're trying to go with that,
mm,
because ultimately the idea would be, I would imagine, and the very clear intent is to do Dune Messiah,
mm, mm,
but she's gone off into the desert now, and she's
mm,
gonna. I don't, and with a sort of bad attitude towards like what
mm.
are they trying to set up?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, she's got a bit of a bad attitude, which isn't in the
Mm.
books. And one other thing I say, one of the criticisms online, on Twitter or whatever, is that the actress, isn't pretty enough. Now, I don't think that actress. She's actually much prettier in real life. They made her look uglier for the film, but
Yeah,
in
they
the
did.
book, she's described as good looking, like a desert rose or something. But she's not described as sort of exquisitely beautiful. The Princess Irulan
Mm.
is supposed to be sort of exquisitely beautiful. And who played her? Is it Florence Pugh? So
Florence Pugh. Yeah.
that was well cast because she is drop dead gorgeous. But Cheney isn't supposed to be necessarily drop dead
Mm.
gorgeous. But nevertheless, I mean that's one little criticism. Oh, one other thing I've just remembered that is in the novels that isn't in the film is that they have a kid. Paul and Cheney
Mm.
have a child in the bit between where 3 years they skip ahead 3 years. They've had a child, little Leto,
Yeah.
and you never see him. There's no scene with him. He's mentioned a bunch of times. Then he dies. The Harkonnens kill him in a raid at some point.
Mm.
Again, off camera, off page, and so you never see him. But they did have a son, and they've obviously where they've decided to make the whole time frame a lot shorter. They just cut all of that out.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, they're the
I
sort of
think
really
that.
my only criticisms. I think.
Yeah, I don't think stuff like that. It doesn't affect. I mean, it doesn't affect what the overall outcome of the movie was, or sort of what they narrative wise, what they where they were going with it. I think that. I think they. I think that was absolutely fine, really, as changes. To be honest.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, some of it's interesting. What did you think of the sort of design choices that they went with for all of the characters? So I mean, just the overall set designs and things
Oh,
like that.
superb. Absolutely superb. Because in
Mm.
the novel, lots of things are described in a fair amount of detail, but lots of things aren't. Lots of things
Mm.
aren't. Like, for example, where you see Jessica when she becomes one of the Reverend Mothers, how they transport someone on the back of a worm over long distances. There's no description of that. But
Mm.
they do actually show you it and things like that were done very very well. They never describe in any detail all the sort of face markings or sort of face tattoos Jessica gets. Yeah, a lot of the clothing, the still suits are described in loads of detail in the book, but nearly everyone else's uniforms and things that aren't. I think it was done very, very good. Things like the Thopters are great. Thopters are really great. The big like spice, the spice, the big spice machines.
Mm.
They all look great. Yeah, no, can't really fault anything on that side of stuff. Um, yeah. What about you?
No, no, no. I would agree. I didn't have any issue with. sort of designs. I'm trying to pick your brain, I guess, to see if there's anything else that you got an
Um,
issue with. But no, I mean,
yeah, no, not really.
I
Um,
enjoyed it all from a design choice perspective. I think that they did really well. Going back to like Florence Pugh's character, for instance, I think they did a really good job with making her appear sort of royal. I get royal. I don't know. There was a almost a
Imperial,
deification to the
Imperial,
character
sir,
with the sort of
not merely royal.
Mm. But yeah, I great. I think they did such a good job. And I looked at it. It was Hans Zimmer that
Okay.
did the score. So I was you
Um,
were right. I was wrong.
one or two other
Um,
things then to say, I think maybe about the casting. I thought it was very good because Paul is difficult to cast because he's supposed to be 15 and a young 15, and then by the end he's supposed to be 18 and a leader of men.
mm.
So you've got to be both those things. That's really difficult. I think they got it. I think they got it just about right with that Chamelet fella.
I think
Gurney Halleck. Who's the guy from
Josh
the
Brolin.
Goonies? Josh Brolin. That's very, very good. I thought Big Dave Bautista as the Bistro Band was
That was
brilliant.
great.
Austin Butler as the Nar Baron, brilliant. He's a great actor. I think he's
Mm.
probably got a great career ahead of him. Yeah, obviously, the Lady Jessica is just about right. Even in June 1, Leto, the Duke, the first Leto the First, Paul's father,
Mm.
he was cast very well, I thought.
What did you think
Um,
of Javier Bardem?
oh,
Stilgar.
brilliant, brilliant, a Stilgar, yeah. No,
Yeah.
that was again kind of perfect for me. Um, so maybe would it be all right if I could do a bit of a deviation
Of
um,
course.
and talk
Deviate.
um, um, and as I threatened to talk a little bit about Lawrence of Arabia
Yeah. No,
and
I'm
Seven
I'm I'm
Pillars
all
of
ears.
Wisdom because Frank Herbert's first novel came out in 1965, I believe it was. And the film Lawrence of Arabia came out in like 1962. And the book that the film Lawrence of Arabia is based on is T.E. Lawrence. Lawrence of Arabia is a real person from World War One. And his book, Seven Pillars of Wisdom, came out between the wars. And for me, I've never seen Frank Herbert hardly ever. I've hardly seen any of him in interview. I really should look some up. But he will have read Seven Pillars of Wisdom because at least June 1 is a reworking of Lawrence of Arabia in all sorts of ways. I didn't read Seven Pillars of Wisdom until I was in my 30s. And when I
Mm.
read it, I'm like, Frank Herbert is plagiarizing bits here. This is really it's as much as that, I would say, in places. So just a very super quick overview of what T.E. Lawrence did and what the book Seven Pillars of Wisdom is. So it's World War One, the war in the East,
Mm.
the war against the Ottoman Turk in World War One, and the guerrilla war that the Arabs have against the Ottoman Turk, and the sort of secret special services, intelligence services help that the Arabs get from the British against the
Mm.
Ottomans, and it's so the Bedouin, the Arab Bedouin of World War One, are the Fremen.
Mm.
Or rather, put the Fremen are the Bedouin
Yeah. Yeah.
Arabs from World War One. Um, there's a great tribal, a real historical figure, an unbelievable tribal figure called Alda Abu Tayi. That is Stilgar. Stilgar is Alda in all sorts of ways. Lawrence of Arabia is Paul. Lawrence of Arabia goes from being not a boy, but a young man, a young, callow, inexperienced man, to a warrior, to a
Mm.
leader of men. That is what T. Lawrence does in 2 or 3 years, and it's Paul. It is Paul, and there's so many more parallels. There's so many more parallels. The one that really sticks in my mind is when the Fremen attack Arrakeen at the end, towards the end, and there's sort of a big worm charge, isn't
Mm.
there? They charge worms at Arrakeen. There's so many parallels there with among the most important battles, quote unquote battles, that Lawrence of Arabia and Abu al-Tayi had against the Ottomans. One at Aqaba. There's a big camel charge against the Ottoman positions at Aqaba.
Oh,
And
wow.
when I saw the worms charging Iraqi in Dune 2, I immediately thought of Lawrence at Aqaba.
So,
Um,
almost direct parallel then.
yeah, yeah. And
Wow.
Paul, I mean, Lawrence T. E. Lawrence was not the leader. He was sort of a British intelligence services person, something between
Mm.
a military officer and a spy. It's not really clear. It was never really clear in Lawrence's own mind, but that's what he was. Whereas the leader of the Arabs was Faisal, Prince Faisal. And so Paul Atreides is sort of both Prince Faisal and T.E.
Mm.
Lawrence. Anyone that's completely familiar with either Seven Pillars of Wisdom or the film Lawrence of Arabia, hopefully will completely agree with me on that. But again, there's so many parallels. I'll sort of stop there because I could go on and on and on about them, even sort of individual words. And so to build on that, in both the novel and of course the films and the 1984 version, the Fremen are they're Arabs, they're Muslim, right?
Yeah.
Their big war is called a jihad. There's a few times Paul is described, along with being called the Lisan al Gaib, is called the Mahdi. They
Mm.
call him the Mahdi. That's Islam. Simple as that. And there's loads of other words. There's loads and loads of other words. In fact, there's one point in the novel where the Fremen mention their ancestors, and he calls them their Sunni ancestors.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah,
Um,
that's.
and there's more. In fact, there's lots and lots of really subtle things that if you weren't kind of familiar with Islamic history would go
Mm.
over your head. There's lots of them. There really are lots of them. Now, again, one thing to say is that Frank Herbert was born in like 1920,
Mm.
so he was like in his mid-40s when this came out. I would bet absolutely everything I own he'd read Seven Pillars of Wisdom probably more than once.
Well, yeah, his
And
exposure to sort of Islam would be it would be minor, given that sort of time period otherwise. So if he hadn't, where else would the sort of inspiration come from otherwise?
right, yeah, it's easy to forget the world pre 9/11 for us in the
Mm.
2020s. Islam played a much smaller role in the consciousness of the West in the
Yeah.
20th century, much smaller, and it was also a lot more. I think it's fair to say this. It was a lot more. It's a lot more sort of mysterious and romantic, even. It's
Oh,
not
there
right.
was it just wasn't in people's consciousness. It just wasn't like it wasn't politicized as much. You know, again, as you say, that's probably a good reference point. Pre 9/11,
Hmm,
the
hmm,
Gen Pop general person on the street,
hmm,
they wouldn't have much of a knowledge of it all. It
hmm.
wasn't really around that much. You know, it
And
just.
one of the things in Islam is that there is one God. There is
Mm.
one God, and Muhammad is his prophet. Um, Now, a lot of that is mirrored in Muad'Dib. That
Mm.
there is one
Yeah.
Mahdi. There is one way, and that we are all one. There's one religion. There will be one jihad, one wild fanatical jihad, which will spread like wildfire across the whole universe. I mean, it's sort of all there. Um,
Mm.
and so, Frank Herbert is what you would call like a 20th century sort of Islamophile. He's obviously had a deep impression, just like T. Lawrence. On some level,
Mm.
T. Lawrence was a Christian and never stopped being a Christian and never really dreamt of converting to Islam, even though they asked him very, very politely many, many, many times. He didn't. But he was obviously, on some other level, loved Islam.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so there's that thing to it. It's
Well, I guess it is that romanticization of it all. I guess that from that sort of level.
mm,
Um, but it is interesting, isn't it? How the choice of words, you
mm,
know. So, but that perfectly encapsulates it, right? So, 1984 version, they use the word jihad. It's fine, whatever jihad. They're like, yeah, the jihad. books, Jihad. Modern day, can't use that word because
Mm.
it's in public consciousness of actually what it is. So it's
Yeah,
interesting, isn't
yeah.
it?
A
You know?
religious war. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe we should touch on that then, because in the second film, certainly, you see some of Paul's sort of waking dreams or some of his dreams, and it's sort of this hellscape of somebody or people sort of dying or writhing in terrible pain, and things like that. And you see it 2 or 3 times in the film.
Bodies piling
And
high.
yeah, yeah, and
Billions.
they don't explain it in the film. It's sort of left unexplained. In the book, um, it cuts back to that a number of times, half a dozen times, maybe more, and it's completely explicit. It just says it flat out, that Paul fears that what he's doing will one day lead to, or maybe there's no way to avoid it leading to, yeah, a universe wide, not a galactic wide, a universe wide jihad, and that he will have legions of fanatical warriors, the Fremen, sort of endless legions of them, storming across the universe, and under the green and black banner of the Atreides, and that his banner will become a thing of horror and terror. And Paul's haunted by that. Paul doesn't want that to happen. He's terrified by that. In fact, it goes on and on and on about Paul is haunted by a sense of his own terrible purpose, and he
Mm.
tries endlessly to try and avoid it. And then, well, maybe in a bit we can talk about the idea, the concept of him being able to see into the future, and the Kwisatz Haderach and all that sort of thing.
Mm.
I don't know if you want to go there yet. But yeah, I suppose I don't want to belabor the point, but there are all these parallels with with Islam.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's important. I think it's interesting to draw the sort of parallels out uh, and discuss them because it's very clearly the inspiration behind the whole book in general. Anyway, um, so
because
yeah, I mean,
because when you look at Stilgar, for example, um, again, brilliantly acted, I thought.
mm,
Stilgar is a religious warrior. Paul is a figure of religious veneration for them.
there's a
Uh,
deity almost at
yeah,
that point.
the Lissam Al Gaib is supposed to be, the voice from the outer world. He's the Mahdi. There's no other better way of putting it.
Mm,
He's the Mahdi. He's a Messiah. In fact, the second
yeah.
book is called Dune Messiah, isn't it? So yeah, and there's this idea that what you do, if you're a Messiah type figure or a prophet or a historical real human being, but one that ends up being venerated, on a
Mm,
spiritual or religious level, that the real reality of you and your life and what you said and did will absolutely inevitably get morphed and changed and exaggerated, and all those sorts of things, sort of out of all
mm,
proportion. There's one great bit in the book where he says when he's going to ride the worm for the first time, when he's going to tame Shai Hulud for the first time, he says, if I die here today, the train of events is already set in motion, that there will still be a jihad in my name, and if I live, it'll be a slightly different one, but there'll still be one. There's one great bit when he first sort of realizes what's happening. That he says that he realizes that the only way he could stop this jihad
mm.
is if everyone around, if he kills every single person around him and his own mother and his unborn sister and himself. That's the only
Yeah.
way to stop it,
Is
because
it?
it's already got its own momentum. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, they really, I mean, they really shied away from that
Mm, mm.
that sort of aspect in part two, but they showed the sort of consequences of veneration and deification in a different fashion, didn't they? Because they showed it from the perspective of him being a sort of unwitting vehicle for deification. So he'd be like, no, 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 and they'd be like, oh, so humble. He's definitely the, you know. So they showed it from a different fashion, but it's just an interesting choice. I wonder why they chose to sort of steer clear from the sort of warning, of sort of deification in that way so explicitly, like they did it in the book. Or it wasn't really a warning, was it, in the book? But the sort of more obvious nature of it.
I think maybe because it's just sort of in bad taste these days. A bit. It'd be bordering
Yeah.
on blasphemous or something. And people seem to be worried or scared about that for some reason, even though it's not the
That's
15th
true.
century. So we'll have to mention a little bit about the Bene Gesserit, right? And the Missionata Protectiva. But the Bene Gesserit, for 90 generations, have been manipulating and fiddling around with the bloodlines of the great houses.
Fascinating.
The
Fascinating
great
addition,
houses of
isn't
the
it?
land. This story, it honestly is as deep and as rich as actual
Yeah.
scripture.
Well, they are going to be
um,
doing a Bene Gesserit HBO Max
are they?
series. So
Oh
that,
well,
yeah. So that would be interesting. That would be
yeah,
really
it will
interesting
be.
to see what sort of avenue they take and which. I don't know. I can't remember if it was a prequel or a sequel, or where it sits in the timeline. But it is something that they're doing, and so that'll be fascinating because I would imagine, not to get too off topic, because obviously we'll talk about that in the film aspect, but I do wonder if they will take the Bene Gesserit and almost tell their story from, I guess, like a political scheming angle. They sort of move between the houses and then meet up. What are they doing? Well, we're doing this. Oh, okay. Well, we need to move back, and then sort of see the machinations of their sort of plans sort of come to fruition here and there, and then they meet up again. And then I wonder if they'll go that avenue with it. Just to sort of see. I don't. It's fascinating. It's such an interesting thing to have, the sort of sisterhood of beings that are trying to culminate in the sort of ultimate. Well, yeah, the ultimate being. It's mind blowing, really.
Oh yeah. It's so deep and rich. The story,
Mm.
the backstory, the universe of Dune. It's unbelievable. So just to let people know, super quick, who may not know. There's this one particular sect, I suppose you could call it, a religious sect in the Empire called the Bene Gesserit, and they're all female. They're often disparaged as the Bene Gesserit witches, and they've got a few
Mm.
powers, like they can sort of command with their voice if they say something and you're weak-minded. It's like a Jedi mind trick. You just sort of find yourself doing what they just commanded. They've got powers like that, not full-blown superhumans, but they've got some powers. Okay, and their whole raison d'etre, the whole point of them, is that for generation after generation they manipulate bloodlines among the great and lesser houses of the Landsraad, in order that hopefully they will produce, again, like a messiah figure, the Kwisatz Haderach, right?
Mm.
And so these Bene Gesserit, they also have some prescience. They're able to sort of see back through time. They're sort of able to pass along the collected memories of their ancestors to each other, and but no man can do it apart from and their collected memories are only through other Bene Gesserit witches. So all
Mm.
female. It's all completely female through the female line. But if there is ever a male that would be able to do it, he would be the one, the chosen one, the Kwisatz Haderach. And men have tried before, and it kills you if you try. And so again, there's like, it's again this idea of the one, the chosen one, a Mahdi, a Messiah, a semi-divine being of some type. Well,
Mm.
it ends up being Paul. So he's both sort of the Mahdi on Arrakis, on Dune, desert planet, and also becomes the
The
we
ultimate
realize
being
he
of the
becomes,
universe.
yeah. Well, actually, no, sorry, he doesn't. It's not him in the end. You think it is him for a long time, but it's actually ultimately. I don't want to ruin things for people, but I think it's his grandson in the end, isn't it? It's the Kwisatz Haderach. But
Yeah, is it a
anyway, that's for
grandson or is it
much,
his
much later.
son?
It's
One of
his
the two.
grandson that turns into half human, half worm thing. That's way down the line.
Yeah,
That's books ahead. We
yeah.
won't complicate things with that. Um, but what Paul can do is he Jessica teaches him the voice.
Mm.
That ability to sort of manipulate, certainly at least weak-minded people, just by commanding them with such authority that they just do as they're told, sort of thing. It's sort of a almost semi-magical thing. But
Mm.
also being able to see back through time, and Paul sort of seems to have a natural ability. If you imbibe the spice, which you do on Arrakis just by breathing, and it's in all the food, that enhances it as well. Although ultimately you build up a resistance to it. But Paul has sort of a natural ability, plus the teachings of his mother, plus the spice, plus he takes the waters of life at one point, which blows it all through the roof. Anyway, Paul, and it's really important to know that Paul, by about halfway through the, or 2/3 of the way through the first novel, is able to see back in time and forward in time, which no one's able to do. That really does make him special. So Frank Herbert says something like that. He finds that he has sort of three eyes. He's got an inner eye, a third inner eye, and he's able to have one eye on the past, one eye on the present, and one sort of imperfect eye on the future. That's going to be all that sort of things. Very difficult to do in a film.
Well, yeah, how would you?
Frank Herbert describes it as, and Paul sort of learns how to see into the future, and that he describes it like you're on the surface of an ocean, a choppy, wavy ocean. And sometimes you're in the trough of the waves and you can't really see much ahead at all. And other times you're on the crest of a wave and you can see really far. But always there's like a promenade on the shoreline, which is this universe-wide jihad that's always there. No matter where you are, that's always sort of looming over him, and that's always visible, sort of shining out of the future at him.
Yeah, I don't think you would have been able to have, creatively speaking, get that to work tonally.
Very difficult
with what they were presenting. I think I think the sort of brief flashes of of the sort of bodies piling high and things like that they showed. I think that worked quite well. I think, I can't think of another way where it would have worked, which would have fit the tone of the movie. I don't think it would have worked in any other way.
Well, it's difficult to do in prose. Like I say, I first read it when I was 16 or 17. I didn't really get it. There's like whole paragraphs. I'm like, what is being said there? I don't really understand. And it took till I was a bit older to sort of, truly, really grasp everything that's being said and stuff. He talks about it gets a bit metaphysical almost in places in the novel. He talks about sort of a time nexus, and that there's a boiling of possibilities, and Paul can see out there's all different lines, all different avenues of possible futures. And what is the present anyway? What does that mean? It's all a bit 1960s hippy dippy, metaphysical, bordering on nonsense a little bit, very close. But no, that's not fair. It's not. It's great. It's brilliantly written. But it's going to be impossible to put into film.
Well, I think that's. I think that's interesting. I think you simply wouldn't be able to put that on film anyway. But also, I don't think it would have served the purpose of how they were presenting it in terms of Paul's sort of motivation in the film, because he was sort of, the sense I got in terms of how they were portraying it was he sort of suspected that the war was coming, didn't know why. And I think there was, at one point, it almost seemed like he was like, my mum's going to cause the war, she's the one sort of spurring it on. And then he sort of embraced it, like, well, I'm going to have to do it. I'm going to have to become this sort of figurehead and move forward with the war myself. But it wasn't as if he was, the way they presented it was more like a reluctancy to it all. It wasn't like he wasn't sort of racing towards it in that fashion. He wasn't trying to embrace the sort of deification either. It was almost like he sort of carried that moniker as and when it suited to serve the purpose moving forwards, until he then drank the waters of life and he was like, oh no, actually shit, I'm good now. Let's go full steam ahead with the jihad, I guess.
Well, no, that's good. Again, that is all in the novel. So when he sort of first sort of becomes aware of this, he's sort of terrified by this possible future that it seems that he's unable to avoid. There's a few bits in the caves where he realizes that every sort of blink of an eye, every sort of movement of a grain of sand makes whole levers across the possible future universe change. And that even doing nothing is a type of action in and of itself. and all that sort of thing. And yeah, and he realizes that Jessica, sort of unbeknownst to herself, will egg it all on, or has already egged it all on, is largely in all sorts of ways responsible for it in the first place
Well, she was
by
very
by
scheming
birthing him. Yeah, and by
in
making
the
sure they don't die
movie,
and
wasn't
all
she?
that sort of thing. She's responsible for it too, and he resents her for it. Again, at least at first, absolutely resents her for it, blames her for it, and he's terrified by this terrible purpose, this possible future that seems increasingly unavoidable. So yeah, it's right that he's reluctant, absolutely reluctant, and even a bit pissed off at Jessica.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What he yeah, the sort of Jessica. I think the character is quite an interesting one, Jessica, because she's shown
Yeah.
quite well in the movie to be communicating a lot with the, can't remember the name, the child, the baby, to scheme to push things forward, and it's almost, well, we've got to move to the south because there's lots of fundamentalists there. We need to, sort of strengthen our position here, and move things forward. So she's really egging it on in a conscious way alongside the unborn, because obviously it wasn't born, the unborn sister, her daughter.
Alia.
So
Yeah, Saint Alia. Yeah, in the novel, Jessica, I would say, is easily the second most important character. And arguably, she's more important or has more page time, if you like,
well, she
than
almost comes
Paul.
across evil in the movie, in kind of what
Hmm.
she's doing with the scheming. Did you get that impression or not?
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. Because I'm so familiar with the book,
Mm,
not so much because in the book Frank Herbert gives you people's inner monologue all the
yeah.
time, so you sort of know that she's cynical and just doing what she needs to do to survive and keep Paul alive.
Mm,
But yeah, in the film, especially Dune 2, if you came to it cold and you hadn't read the book, she would probably come across as just sort of something bordering on evil, yeah, or so cynical that it's evil in some way.
mm.
Um, which really, or I think what Frank Herbert had in mind was that she's just trying to keep them alive.
Well, I guess it's
Um,
out of necessity, isn't it? It's action out of
mm,
necessity. So
mm.
we
Plus,
must embrace this.
she's Bene Gesserit. It's her whole point is to serve. Her whole point in life is to forward the Bene Gesserit calls.
Mm.
Um, so again, that's sort of that's what she's there for. So sorry, yeah, I think I spoke over you there. Apologies.
No, well, I want to go back to Kynes and Chani, because they completely rejected all of the sort of connection there, didn't they? Didn't go
What,
anywhere with that.
Liet-Kynes, the
Yeah.
planetologist? Right, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so in the novel, there's a massive character, Liet-Kynes, the planetologist, who's supposed to be Chani's father. And in the
Yeah.
novel, in the first third of it, he's a massive character. Massive
Mm,
character. There's and what he does and says is really, really important. He turns the Fremen from being a fairly sort of what you might say a hopeless desert people into uh, a great people that end up sort of conquering the universe. All that you can put at the feet of Liet-Kynes in the first place. And the films do skate over that heavily, to put it mildly.
yeah, yeah. And also, it's a woman, so not a bloke.
Yeah, who is it in the first? Who plays?
It's just I don't know the actress. It's a black woman that they had.
Is
It's
that
there's
supposed to be
such an
Liet-Kynes?
inconsequential part. They don't really do anything with it, to be
Is that
fair.
supposed to be Liet-Kynes? That black woman?
Yeah, yeah,
Is it?
yeah.
That. Oh,
That went way over your head then.
yeah, way over my head. Way over my head.
Yeah, but
I
that's what I
thought that.
mean. They didn't go anywhere with it. It's such a bizarre way to do it.
Well, so just to say then, in the novels, Liet-Kynes is supposed to be the judge of change, where the House Harkonnen controlled Arrakis, and the
Mm,
Emperor ordered that they've got to get out and leave the fief of Arrakis, and the House Atreides will take over. And there's supposed to be a judge of the change or a lord of to sort of oversee that everything's done fairly. And it's this guy called Liet-Kynes who's like an ecologist or a planetologist who's supposed to know
mm,
everything about ecology and planetology and some sort of ultimate imperial arbiter. And he's really, really important. And he's gone native. he's gone Fremen. His eyes from from eating so much spice, his eyes have gone. The whites of his eyes have gone blue, blue within blue,
Blue within
and
blue.
and the Fremen absolutely trust him or look up to him as some sort of not quite savior, not quite messiah, but
Mm,
absolutely comes because he's told them what they need to do in order to basically terraform Arrakis into a planet of plenty. Um,
mm,
so, so again, at least in the first half of the novel, it's a massive character. And when he dies, when the Harkonnen re-attack the Atreides, um, he's taken out into the desert and left there to die, which he does. And there's a very long scene in the novel of his very long poignant scene of his death in the novel, where he hallucinates about his father and all sorts of things. So to change that to that black woman character that drowns
weird.
a baby maker to get the waters of life, that passed me by. That's supposed to be Liet-Kynes.
Mm.
That's in fact that has now taken the top spot in my criticisms of it. I thought she was just supposed to
Yeah.
be a Fremen. I thought she was just supposed to be like a
I don't
Reverend
know. Are we
Mother
talking about?
Helper. That black woman.
No, I don't know if we're talking about the same person. So
Okay.
it's the again, it's such an inconsequential character. So I don't think you. I think you're referencing a different person there.
Oh,
So
okay.
in
All
the
right.
first one,
Yeah.
there was a black lady with dreadlocks. It's her. Do you remember her?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Okay. So they've just completely sex and race swapped that
Yeah,
for
just
some reason.
randomly. Yeah,
Okay.
just very very bizarre thing, and then doesn't really go anywhere with the character, to be
Mm,
honest. But then they didn't in the '84 version when they
right.
had the great Max von Sydow
Mm,
um, in the
great
role. They
actor.
didn't really do a lot. They did a fair amount, but not a lot. Certainly nowhere uh, sort of novel origins anyway. That's for sure. Um, I do think that there's some stuff Denis, I guess, used as inspiration from the '84 version. And I think that's the sort of role of Kynes is one of them, because it's an odd choice to do, isn't it? To sort of minimise the role as much as
Mm,
both
mm,
versions have done.
mm. Yeah. I suppose maybe just because from a narrative point of view, it's a dead end. He just
True.
dies. The Harkonnens just sort of murder him. But in the novel, anyway, it's a really important one. There's appendices in the
Mm,
novel and they're all by Liet-Kynes and talking about the nature of Arrakis and what the deep future will hold for the terraforming of Arrakis and things. And there's even a story about Liet-Kynes' father, the sort of the first planetologist that was sent there by the Imperium, and his unfortunate death in a cave in. And it's quite deep. I mean, the first Dune novel is quite thick. It's quite a thick book,
mm,
um, and the way the Fremen look up to him, he's sort of an actual tribal leader in some way, and he absolutely saves Jessica and Paul's life in the first
mm.
instance when they have to flee into the desert. It's Liet-Kynes that is responsible for keeping them alive. So
Yeah,
yeah, I suppose if you had to cut one very very big character, maybe it would be him, or it's like missing out Doctor Yui or something. I feel like you sort of can't. He has
yeah,
to be in there somewhere.
yeah. Well,
Um,
it's sort of yeah, no, true. Well, it's plot elements, isn't it? So
yeah, yeah.
interesting. What did you think of? So to go to the sort of changes from the novel to the movie. It's obviously time jump in the novel, movie, none. Um, I think they did a good job of displaying a sort of a figurative sort of maturation of Paul, with sort of how stern he became, and sort of commanding, sort of became more of a presence on screen. Because
Mm,
if
mm,
you go back and
mm,
watch the first one in conjunction with the second, he has
mm,
significant more presence as he sort of embraces the role a little bit more. And I guess that
mm,
would, if you're sort of marrying it up to the novel per se, it would sort of go in conjunction with that. And I think they did
mm,
a really good job of his screen presence and his sort of sort of like charisma, I don't know, commanding voice, whatever it was. I think they did a good job of that there. I don't know what you thought about that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. Like I say, in the 84 version with McLaughlin, they completely fail. They completely fail to do
It's
that,
because he's
really.
30 from the off.
Yeah, right. So I think they do it really, really well. And it's done really well in the novel. So the fact that... So one of the things I would say about the first Dune book is that it's a coming-of-age story. Paul starts as a boy. And by the end, he's the emperor, and truly commands authority as like an 18-year-old. That's a difficult arc to make realistic in any way.
Yeah.
And the novel does it, but that's because Frank Herbert is a master, in my opinion, of storytelling. But to pull that off with a screenplay and to depict it on screen, even harder, perhaps. And I think they did a bloody good job of it. I
Yeah.
do think that Timothy Chalamet could maybe have bulked on a bit more upper body, maybe.
Yeah, no, very true. Very true.
But
A slight frame.
but then he's supposed to be, at the, not only a few months are supposed to have passed. So how
Yeah.
can you go from a believable 15-year-old to a believable 18-year-old leader in months physically? That's very difficult. So there are a few bits, but the story is a sort of a coming of age story in a way. That transformation from childhood to manhood, and that at some point, and we all go through it, don't we? If you survive to adulthood, that at some point you have to put away childish things. You've got to come to terms with the fact that the world is pretty brutal, or can be, and that's reality. You've got to deal
Yeah.
with that. You've got to deal with it. You can't run away from it. It's coming for you.
There's also
Okay. Sorry.
the ability to embrace responsibility, which I guess is perfectly encapsulated with Paul's sort of sense of what he has to do and what he has to become. It is that sense of duty and responsibility, which is again, what you do as a person, as a man, as we all do. It's full maturation as an individual is understanding your roles, responsibilities, and duties within your surroundings and accepting that. The rejection of that, I think, is, philosophically speaking, is that sort of immaturity that people carry moving forwards. They fail to mature.
And as a child, you're sort of, or hopefully anyway, as a child, you're sort of fairly closeted, sort of fairly. Hopefully, your parents, for a while at least, will sort of wrap you up in cotton wool and protect you from sort of the never-ending barrage of nastiness that is the real world. But at some point,
not so much these days, but so, let's hope so.
But at some point, it says when Paul first leaves Caladan for Arrakis, right at the beginning, he says because that's a massive change, isn't it? When you have to move or anything like that, sort of a life-changing, profound, never to go back level change, and that's what adulthood, or at least going into adulthood, is all about. And that it's not going to stop. You're going to have to come to terms with the fact that you will be bombarded by change, and quite often unwelcome change and things. The death of your father. The death of your father, or the death of any parent, or the death of anyone extremely close to you that you love and cannot be replaced. Things as serious and as brutal as that. So all those themes come up in Dune. I mean, he loses his father, doesn't he? His father is assassinated.
Yeah.
And how to come to terms with that. Not only is your dad died or been killed or been murdered, but you are now the head of the household. He is now the Duke. All the responsibility is now yours. Are you going to be crushed by that, or are you going to man up? Actually, have you got a chest or not? Are you going to wear the trousers? All those. It's a coming of age story, and not just from a little boy to a teenager coming of age story, but from a teenager to a full grown man with actual responsibility that you stare in the eye. That sort of coming of age thing. Now, I say there's parallels there with T.E. Lawrence as well. It goes from sort of quite a naive, almost callow young man to a hard bitten man. Uh, so there was a few bits. There were a few bits in Dune 2 which almost took my breath away. I actually got sort of tingles down the spine. Um, like the hairs on my forearm stood on end almost. One of the bits was when he rides the worm for the first time. Because in the book, he's fully accepted as one of the Fremen, and they're pretty sure he's the Lisan al Gaib. He's the Mahdi. But until you've captured and ridden a worm for the first time, you can't be counted among one of the actual guerrilla warriors. Whilst you have to lean on another man to capture a worm for you, you will remain a boy on some level. So that's part of the Fremen sort of almost a coming of age ritual or something, is that you catch and ride a worm for yourself and you become a worm rider. And well, you become a man, and so it's a really important thing in the book, and it's a metaphor for growing up in all sorts of ways, or becoming a man, or something along those
I think
lines.
they displayed that really well in the movie overall. They did a very, very good job. The sort of intricacies in showing it all. How they do it was very, very, very interesting. Great way to sort of visualize it all. And the response from the Fremen as well. It was a very interesting response, sort of seeing it instantaneously, and then the sort of evening of. I guess it was the evening of, because it was a slight time jump, wasn't it? The sort of in the tents. But yeah, it is the sort of coming of age in conjunction with the sort of acceptance more so into the Fremen all in one go as well, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, that's another quick thing to mention. The difference between the novel and the films is that his naming as Muad'Dib, or he picks his own name, Muad'Dib, and that's his sort of private name, and his warrior name, Usul, and a couple of other bits and bobs are sort of out of sequence and a bit different. The fight and the killing of Jamis is different in the novel. It doesn't take place right away. It's back at their HQ or CH. So that's a bit different, and a couple of little things are sort of moved around a bit. It must just be for timing and pacing. It doesn't really ruin anything or make any real difference.
I think they probably did. Sorry to interrupt. I think they probably did the fight, Janus, to get something in part one.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
it was the only real violent action, wasn't it, in the first one?
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah. Well, aside from the sort of siege, but
well, yes.
With that's. I think that was it. I think it was to get some more in sort of part one. I think that's why. That's all I can think of. I wouldn't. Otherwise, I don't see what purpose it would have served. I think it's just that.
I mean, in the book, the Fremen pick them up in the desert, and there's some sort of altercation between Jessica and Stilgar, but it's not. And Paul disarms Jamis, and it's not till they get back to, as I say, the HQ a few scenes later, or a few dozen pages later, that Jamis then calls him out. Then calls Paul out, and then they fight to the death. So that's a bit different. Yeah, and the naming conventions are staggered a bit differently in the book, but anyway. But the bit when he rides the worm for the first time, I did get a bit of a tingle, because there's a bit when he's got his hooks in, and he's crouching down, but then when he first sort of gets off his knees and stands, that's sort of a moment, because it proves to the Fremen, and to himself, but it proves to the Fremen that he is the Lisan al Gaib, that he almost certainly, anyway, is the Mahdi. And for me, it's also he's not just the boy, not just the Prince Paul. He's the rightful Duke Atreides, son of Leto, son of Paulus Atreides, the old Duke. He is the one. The
Yeah.
Chosen One. And I almost had to stop myself from standing up in the cinema and calling out Muad'Dib, Muad'Dib. I felt like doing that. I honestly felt like doing that. It got me there a little bit.
Yeah.
There's another couple of. That's why I thought this film was very, very good, especially if you've read the novel and love the novel. There's a few other bits in it. There's a bit when he meets up with Gurney Halleck.
Mm.
In the novel, Gurney Halleck is Paul's favourite one of his father's men. He's the only one out of Duncan Idaho and Dr. Yui, and there's Halleck, and what's his mentat?
Oh God, I can't remember his name. It's an intricate name as well.
Thulfthir Hawat, his father's original mentat, who in the book goes over and works for the Baron and commits suicide right at the end. All that seems to anyway. Gurney Halleck, the warrior bard, is Paul's favourite, and Gurney obviously absolutely loves Paul as well. And when they meet up, it's both powerful in the book, but in the film, again, it sort of plucked at my heartstrings, where Josh Brolin sort of great acting, sort of can't believe his eyes because he assumes Paul's dead, and he finds him and they embrace, and Paul just calls him Gurney Man. And he loves and they had, you see Josh Brolin playing the balisette. He's supposed to be like both a warrior and a musician on some level, and they sort of get that in there, or at least a reference to it here or there. That really got me. There's a couple other real quick, if I mention them, real quick bits. When Paul drinks the water of life, that's actually quite different in the novel. It all happens off screen or off page, so to speak. And we just find out that Paul's in some sort of coma and has been in some sort of coma for like 2 weeks. And he appears dead, but Jessica knows that he's actually not dead. He's just in some sort of deep, deep poisonous type coma, and no one knows why. He didn't tell anyone he was going to sample the waters of life. And anyway, just to cut that short. When he first comes round from it, that means that the fact that he didn't die means that he is either the Kwisatz Haderach, or is potentially still a possibility that he is. It means that he's something more than a man, less than a god, but more than a man. It means that the Fremen were right to think of him as some sort of semi-messiah, some sort of prophet, some sort of spiritual, something more than a man, put it that way. And so in the film, when Paul's eyes flick open and it's clear it's not dead, once or twice it sort of flicks to Jessica's face and it flicks to Gurney's face. And again, they don't say anything in the film, so you wouldn't probably wouldn't pick up on it if you hadn't read the novel. But the acting is done perfectly. It's done very, very light touch. Denis Villeneuve is a superb bit of directing for me there, because he could have hit you over the head with that. Yeah, he doesn't. Yeah. He just leaves it to some very delicate, very quick shots of Jessica, sort of the surprise and the wonder, the amazement on Jessica and Gurney's face that, oh, Paul is semi-divine or something.
Well, so you say that you could definitely see that from Gurney as well. So as from meeting up, from the initial meetup and the embrace, every single time Gurney watched Paul, you could see the respect grow, and then and then it sort of culminated in sort of realizing that he is much more. But you could see it, and actually, if you if you watch it from that point onwards, or if you didn't pick up on it or whatever, it's really well acted. It's sort of a nice, steady, slow respect build, and it's very nuanced in the sort of emoting of Josh Brolin. Great actor, actually. Doesn't get nearly enough credit, to be fair.
Yeah, no, I think he's a great actor. One other point, just to build on the theme we were talking about of this transition from a boy, a sort of a small 15-year-old, to a legit leader of men with authority and gravitas that's off the scale, and he could be a believable emperor at 18. That arc. Um, in um, in the book, it's done very well, but in the film, I thought they managed it very, very well. When Paul, the scene where Paul sort of proclaims himself to the Fremen, that he is he takes on board. He is the Lisan Al Gaib. There's a
Which,
scene.
which which are we talking about? Are we talking about
Yeah,
when they're sort of under? I think they were underground at the
yeah,
time.
that
Are we
one.
talking about that one? We sort of burst in,
Yeah, yeah,
and Jessica's like, "No, no, go easy,"
yeah,
but he's just
yeah.
going for it.
So, a couple of things to say about that in the novel, which they couldn't really do in the film, is that Paul isn't sure. He's in a trough of being able to see the future. He's not sure at all if he's going to come out of this alive. So he's playing a real, he's playing a real game of chance here. He's
Mm,
throwing the dice higher politically and seeing where the chips fall. He's got to risk everything because again they do it in the film, but there's more of it in the novel where he's not allowed. He's technically not allowed to speak in that arena, in that
mm,
gathering. Only leaders of tribes are allowed to speak. Now Paul's tribe is led by Stilgar, and he's supposed to challenge Stilgar in single combat, defeat him, kill him, legitimately, legally, if you like, take the leadership of that tribe, and only then does that even entitle him to speak, let alone proclaim him all of their leader.
mm.
So he foregoes all of that. He says, "What, you expect me to kill one of our best men, Stilgar? You expect me to chop off my own right arm? So no, I'm
No.
not doing that. So I'm breaking the rules right away, and I'm going to speak in front of you all. And there's nothing
Mm,
you're going to do about it. And I am the Mahdi, and I am the voice from the outer world. I am your leader. Um, like, deal with it. What are you going to do? Do you defy me? Do you?" So
yeah.
it's a massive, massive gamble. And for someone like Timothy Chalamet to pull that off with his tiny little pecker neck,
Mm.
and he does for me anyway. For me,
No, he does. I
it, it,
agree.
it
I agree.
worked.
Did a really
It
good job.
worked. I almost got a shiver down my spine when he sort of
Mm,
raises his Chris knife in the air, which is supposed to be the teeth of worms, um, and proclaims himself their leader. I
mm.
didn't think, oh god, that fell flat. Oh god, Chalamet's not believable in that. No, it worked for me. It worked
Yeah,
remarkably.
I think it's a combination of Chalamet, really really good performance, and a really good use of sound mixing. So the audio mixing on this film was brilliant. So I watched it. I think you probably did too. I think most people did watch it in IMAX. And most normal IMAX films you would have watched were Christopher Nolan's, probably. And he has an awful, awful history of terrible audio mixing, where sort of the vocals are quiet, but other things are too loud, and it's just a big mess. But they did such a great job with the audio mixing on this. Certain points are right at the perfect level, and then in conjunction with great direction, great cinematography, you see, Chalamet sort of storm in almost, but not. He does sort of storm in,
Mm.
um, and then that the sort of power that he exudes from his voice, sort of pulling up one of the Fremens, like I know you did, your X, Y, and Z. I know you, your X, Y, and Z. I am blah blah blah. Brilliant, really, really landed. It was
Mm.
fantastic, really, really good.
Yeah, no, for me, yeah, absolutely, and I hope it did for everyone else. There's a few things they say in the book which they just sort of, again, without a voiceover, you couldn't really do. I suppose you just have to, if you're going to show and not tell, it would be a
Mm,
difficult thing to do. But it's this thing that Paul is supposed to be, and it's the same theme he's on steroids with his little sister, Alia, Saint Alia of the Knife, is that they're a child, but they behave and act and speak like an adult. Okay, at the
mm,
beginning, he's supposed to be 15 and sort of quite a weakly little 15, but yet he behaves and speaks and makes decisions as an adult.
mm,
And when, as soon as everyone around him, when they realise that, they're all taken aback by it, and and that just goes on and on and on until, like you say, he's like an 18-year-old, and again in the novel, it's all done not with dialogue. It's just the narrator, the omniscient
mm.
narrator, tells you. Um, that people are just surprised that the juxtaposition between what he looks like, i.e., an 18-year-old, and how he behaves and the amount of authority he exudes from what he says, that even Jessica is surprised, like quite
Mm.
often, like more than once, quite often surprised, like saying, "Oh wow, I've just noticed he's got to a new level of shining authority, a type of authority shining out of him, and it's
Mm.
undeniable." Um, I don't know if Chalamet's performance quite reaches that peak, but not
Well,
far
there's
off. Not far off though. It's well done.
no.
Give it
Well,
to
there's
him.
one piece of dialogue where he shouts at Jessica, which
Mm,
I think takes her aback and is probably Denis' representation of that, I guess, from the novel. So he shouts at her and says, "That's not." I can't remember what it was. That's not hope, wasn't it? He shouts, "That's not hope,"
mm,
and she's
mm,
like, "Whoa!" It's a visual. I'm okay. Wasn't expecting that. Both respect and I don't know, probably maybe a little bit of fear. To be fair, I think they did a really good job there. I think that's
mm.
probably Denis' visual representation of that. I guess.
And also, Paul is supposed to be able to use the Bene Gesserit voice, which has
Mm.
got an almost magical quality to it. But that's another thing about sort of coming of age, isn't it? At some point, you have to say to your parents, "No."
Yes.
They
Yeah.
tell
Yeah.
you
That's true.
something. They tell you
Actually.
something, or even command you to do something, and you say, "No, that ain't
Mm.
happening. That ain't happening. You're dealing with a
Yeah.
grown
It's a
up
sort of
now, right?"
defiance thing. Yeah. The sort of
Yeah.
the trepidation of rejecting your parental authority the first time, and
Mm,
sort of the ramifications of that.
mm,
It opens the floodgates. From then on, the interaction is completely different because you have sort of crossed a precipice, haven't you? You have
mm, mm,
matured in that moment.
mm,
Um, I hadn't thought of it like that. That's a very interesting way to put it, actually, and very, very true. I think
mm.
that perfectly parallels that.
It's like, no, I am an adult in my own right now, and
Mm.
you can't tell me, like in Labyrinth with David Bowie, you have no power over me anymore. I'm afraid. Um, I'm a legitimate sort of autonomous power in
Mm.
my own right, and you
Yeah.
can't treat me as a kid
You
anymore.
can request, but you can't.
Right,
You can't command.
right. There's a line actually in the novel Gene where it's from it's from the Princess Urulan, something like I can't remember the exact line, but it's a paraphrase, but it's something like a part of your childhood dies when you realize that your father is merely mortal, merely flesh and blood, or
Mm.
is fallible. Um, when you realize that there's something between your mother and father that you can never be a part of, quite serious adult
Mm.
themes like that are all part of growing up or becoming an adult in some ways.
Mm.
So yeah, it's all in there. There was one other point in the movie which sort of gave me a chill down my spine a bit. At the end, the fight scene at the end, at the very end. One difference there is that Haderach stabs Paul, doesn't he?
Mm.
He sinks a knife right in his torso, doesn't he? In the movie, that doesn't happen
Yeah.
in the book. They both give each other light wounds, very light scratches,
Mm.
and then Paul thrusts a knife through his head. So I think up under the chin into his brain. I think it says something like that.
Mm.
But Paul doesn't get deeply wounded or stabbed in the book. Anyway, that's different. But anyway, after he wins, which is the same, of course, he sort of requests or demands the hand of the Princess Irulan, and basically, essentially, requests the imperial crown off the Emperor Shaddam IV, Christopher Walken. And in the film, and Jessica gets the nod from the existing Reverend Mother, um,
Mm.
Gaius Helen. I can't remember her name anyway. In the film, for me, again, it might have just been me. It was handled very, very well when Walken sort of pauses for a moment and then physically bends the knee to kiss Paul's ducal signet ring. And there's some shots of Jessica and the Reverend Mother's reaction, and yeah, it worked again for me. It worked.
Mm.
Um,
I know. I agree. I think the only thing that was off-putting was the sort of spoilt child that Chani became in that moment and sort of stormed off. That's the only thing that I would. I think Christopher Walken did that the whole performance and interaction really really well. I think the direction was great. Again, the sort of pause and the sort of reluctant acceptance that he must now do this. It's very much, I don't want to, but I'm going to because I have to. And it's almost accepting that he literally brought this all on himself, because if he didn't start any of this, it would never have occurred. He's like, okay, fine. Yeah, handled very very well. But yeah, the Cheney thing, just it did throw me off. I was like, what
yeah,
what okay, all right then.
yeah, yeah. No, yeah, absolutely right. So Paul sort of insists that he take the princess, or was it Florence Pugh, as his consort,
Mm,
as his wife. And all the way through the story, he always knew he had to do that if he's going to retake his place at the head of one of the great houses of the Landsraad and even be the emperor. He's got to marry well. He's
mm,
kind of got to marry that princess. Um, and so in the book, Cheney's sort of okay with that, or in another way of putting it is that she just understands that that's the way it's got to be.
mm,
And Paul says to her in the novel, "I'll always love you. You're the first one. You're my actual love, but I've got to do this."
this is
And
political, basically.
yeah, just purely political. Yeah, my actual affections, my actual heart will never be with her. It'll always be with you.
Mm.
And Cheney in the novel just gets it, understands that, and doesn't put up a fight and doesn't storm off, doesn't like or anything. And yeah, but in the film, for some reason, they made her be all sort of uppity and pissed
Yeah,
off and weirded out by it all. I don't know
yeah.
why they
Well,
chose
because
to
they
do
also
that.
they do include that dialogue. There is words to that effect.
Yeah,
Like he
just
does say.
beforehand,
I mean, I
right?
can't remember what it was, but he does say
Yeah.
it is words to that effect. It's the sort of the whatever comes from here or something like that. I think he said. Um,
But she just looks at him like, "What? Like, what are
yeah,
you
it was
doing
it
now?
was
What?"
odd.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was odd.
It just
It
makes
was
you.
odd.
It just makes you less you just empathise much less with Cheney at that point.
Oh yeah,
Well, I did me
yeah.
anyway. That was my reaction.
No, you're completely right. It is interesting that these through a bizarre drive, because one can imagine why they chose to do it. It's because you don't want to see a woman be okay with a man getting with another woman. I'm assuming. So in an effort to strengthen her character, they make her appear petulant and more unlikable. You're not
Petulance,
empathizing with her in
exactly
that
right.
moment. You're actually going, but I mean, this has to, the audience gets it. We understand why it has to happen. But again, they're doing that. The change is doing that to make her appear, stronger for whatever reason. But it doesn't make you like her in any way. She's
Mm.
not loses all the charm, or whatever charm she did have. It's fascinating. I don't know. I always find that fascinating. The changes that they do in an effort to make people more likable. It always backfires. Always backfires.
That's one other thing where I think the character of Paul Muad'Dib is so great because both in the novel and they do it in the film very well. Again, in my opinion, is that he's not perfect.
Mm.
He's absolutely not perfect. Nobody. What do they call it? Is it a Mary Sue?
Yeah, Mary
A
Sue.
type of you could have a male Mary Sue
Gary
type.
Stu, I think we call him.
Oh, really? I've never heard
Yeah,
that before. That's very good. Gary
Gary
Sue.
Stu and Mary
He-
Stu.
He's not a Gary Stu, is he? He's
No.
flawed. He's flawed, and he knows he's flawed, and
Mm.
he
Well, he
knows
goes on
he's.
a traditional hero's journey as well. You
Mm,
know, he
mm,
genuinely goes on a traditional hero's journey. He starts at one point, like he's at point A to point B to point C. He has to go through a series of events where his flaws are exposed to the viewer, or obviously the reader, in the respect of the novel. For us to even have any level of respect for his end sort of presence that he has. And if you didn't go from A to B, you wouldn't respect him at C. You just
Right.
wouldn't.
Right.
But that's lost. That's lost in modern day filmmaking. Generally speaking, we don't get a hero's journey, and I think that's why this was rounded out so satisfying, because they kept all of that. They kept, as you rightly say, the flaws. He is very flawed, and he's aware of it.
Mm. Yeah, aware of it, and also aware that he's powerless to not be flawed. Right.
Mm.
It's not like, okay, I'm flawed, but at some point I will be perfect. When I arrive at point C, I should be perfect at that point, and everyone will love
Mm.
me. No, it's never going to happen. You're flawed, and you will remain flawed. I
Well,
mean,
especially
it's
especially with what transpires post film in terms of what's going to happen.
right.
I say that's
Yeah, yeah, struggling as we all do, I imagine, to more or less degrees, struggling with the fact that we're not perfect, that we make mistakes and are
Mm.
bound to make more mistakes, beating ourselves up about opportunities missed, or things we know we won't be able to prevent ourselves from doing, which aren't the best decisions, all that sort of stuff. Like someone,
Mm.
luckily I'm not really, I haven't really got any terrible bad vices, but people that are, maybe say you're like a heroin addict, and you're
Oh, you
incapable, you're incapable of weaning yourself off, and you hate yourself for it or something.
you could
So
have started with something lighter, just a bit of alcohol. You went straight for
yeah.
pasta.
Or any addiction which is bad, it's destroying you and the
Yeah.
people around you, and yet you're powerless to stop it, or you feel yourself
Mm.
powerless to stop it, like a degenerate gambler or something.
But that's another,
You know,
as you quite rightly say, that's how this perfectly represents coming of age. That's another coming of age, and sort of maturity aspect is self-reflection. Understanding your flaws and your weaknesses, and where you sort of sit in the world. But understanding that we all have those flaws and weaknesses. It's a high level of immaturity to simply say, "Well, I'm fine. Don't worry about it," and do no sort of introspective thought. So that's another great example of that sort of coming of age element.
it's one of the maladies of our age, if I can get a bit philosophical very briefly. It's one of the maladies of our age that we're told you're perfect. You're perfect the way you are. Don't worry about the fact you're like sort of morbidly obese or something,
Yeah,
or a degenerate in all sorts of ways. Don't worry about it because you're perfect. No,
it's
you're not.
acceptance, isn't it?
No, you're not. And
Yeah.
furthermore, you probably will never be, because no one
Mm.
is really. So yeah, the art of characterization is lost in a lot of movies and TVs these days. So a character like Paul is an example of great characterization, that he goes through this
Mm.
journey, as you say, and he's not perfect, and he knows he's not perfect, and but yet still this journey, um, um, and that you follow him along the way, and that some people that are flawed are more appealing. It's more real. Something
You
that
have more.
springs to mind. Oh, sorry.
Mm. I
I
was
was
just
just
to say, you
saying.
have more empathy with people that are flawed. You can
Right.
empathize with them, because
Right.
we are all flawed. You
Right.
present someone that is just sure fine. They're great. That it's vacuous. It's empty. You
Mm,
can't you
mm,
can't relate to anyone that is
mm,
presented in that way. You just can't.
mm. Yeah, no, absolutely. One character that springs to mind is Sherlock Holmes. I
Mm.
went through a period when I was a bit younger, through my 20s, of um, reading all the Sherlock Holmes stories and watching as many TV and film adaptations as I could. I love the Jeremy Brett ones from the 70s. Anyway,
Mm.
Holmes is sort of, in many ways, a Mary Sue or a Gary Sue. He's sort of saccharine, sweet, perfect to everything he does and touches and turns to gold. He's brilliant and never
Mm.
fails, except he is actually a degenerate opium fiend.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of
Yeah, that's
times,
true.
only a couple of times in any of the original Arthur Conan Doyle stories where it's made clear that actually he struggles with drug addiction. massively.
Mm.
There's one story, I can't remember which one it is, but um, 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 Dr. Watson finds him in an opium den, sort of drugged out of
Mm.
his mind, and pulls him. Anyway, the point is that Holmes becomes a much richer character, a much more sympathetic character when you know, in fact, he's not perfect.
Yeah.
He's far
Yeah.
from
No,
perfect, actually.
I agree with that.
Um,
Absolutely agree with that.
and
But again, that's lost, and I think that that's what they failed to do. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's what they tried to do with Chani in doing what she would do, because people
maybe,
would do that. I guess. I don't know. I'm trying to think of the sort of mindset. I don't think it is that. I'm playing devil's advocate a bit too much, but
but
yeah, I don't know.
there's more or less successful ways to go about it, right?
Yeah.
What they did with Cheney is just to make her petulant. Now, I think that's the perfect
Mm.
word you chose there. It comes
Yeah.
across as
But she just storms off again like a
petulant. Yeah,
child. Like, what are
yeah,
you doing?
yeah,
It was odd.
yeah. No, I don't empathise with you. No, I'm on board with Paul. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah. Well, there's
Oh.
so many more things. I understand they are going to make a part three. I think they're making a part three.
So, I
Do you
mean,
know it? Have
by
you got any
now that
insight
would
on that?
all but be confirmed. I on the lead up to the film's release, they were hammering home if this movie does well, if this movie does well, which generally speaking implies that they've got, they've sort of penciled in the financiers. Hey, can we? Yeah, yeah, sort of. But if it hits this sort of margin, um, and the response has been brilliant to the film. Opening weekend, good, respectable numbers. It's not mind-blowing numbers, but what was absolutely incredible was the drop-off from week 1 to week 2. So the drop-off is what tells you whether a film, is like a one-hit wonder. A little bit of a, like a one-weeker. So a Marvel film is a one-weeker. A Marvel film comes out. If it doesn't make its budget back in its opening weekend, it probably won't, because they drop off an average of 60% from box office,
It's
first
a
week to
lot.
second week. Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. This movie had a drop off of about 30%,
Hmm.
which is brilliant. It is absolutely brilliant, which means word of mouth is carrying it.
Hmm.
It means people are constantly, talking about it and wanting it to do well and passing it on, and whether that's a byproduct of the theaters as well. I don't think it is. I think a movie like this isn't necessarily doing well. Is not a symptom of a dry spell in theaters, and then this movie coming out. It's a symptom of it having very good word of mouth because it's a good film.
Hmm.
I would put it down to that, and so because it's doing well, I would say it's all but confirmed that a third one would be on the way. Not for a while though, because I think Denis said he's making like 2 other movies beforehand. Not that I know what they are, but yeah, the third one would definitely be on the way. But then that's supposedly just Dune Messiah. Do you think that they could do that whole story in one movie? No, that's what I thought.
I wouldn't have thought so. So there are loads of Dune novels, loads. I can't even remember how many
Mm.
there are because Frank Herbert died, and then his
Yeah, his son
son
carried it on.
kept writing them. Yeah. So I actually don't know how many there are, 8 or 9 or more.
I think it's
Anyway,
8. Off the top of
is
my
it
head, I
that?
think it was 8.
The first 3 are sort of the first 3 are sort of the best, the main ones, right?
Mm.
And if they do it at the same pace as these first 2, that could be 10 movies or something if they wanted to. Maybe I'm exaggerating slightly, but not much. The story keeps getting exponentially bigger, sort of almost crazily bigger.
Mm. Do you think?
So
What do you think that? Sorry to interrupt, but do you think
yeah,
that they could possibly do that in a socio-political climate that we're in, especially given the fact that they were very anti stating what it was, which was a jihad? Do you
mm.
think that they could do Dune Messiah as it is, story-wise, as a good, worthy adaptation? I think that's a worthwhile question asking.
I think they certainly could. Whether they
Mm.
will is something a bit different. I think what they could probably do if they want to just err on the side of caution is just not call it a jihad, just use another word.
Mm.
Maybe if they don't like the word Messiah, call him something else. Just keep calling him Lisan Al Gaib or something.
Mm.
They obviously didn't want to use the word Mahdi. They obviously didn't want to use the word jihad, but they could still do it all and just sort of change some of the wording a bit.
That's
Uh,
fair. That's fair.
but if they are going to go on and do more films, go on and do Dune Messiah or something, there would be no way to avoid it. That's the whole story. It's a sort of
Mm.
universe wide or galactic wide war, a sort of a
Mm.
religious war in Paul's name.
Yeah.
So there's no way to avoid it. So that is what it is.
Well, yeah, I would be down for as many of these as they're willing to make. I'll be very, very happy with this. I think
Me too.
hopefully my hope from this film, and we've not seen it yet because the movie industry is still sort of reeling from the strikes. But I'm hoping from this film, other studios begin to greenlight more sci-fi, because that's what tends to happen is that you get, a movie hits, it does well, it's critically and, critically acclaimed, fan acclaimed, box office, and then every studio just copies. It's why we've got multiple bloody movie universes all the time and so many bloody caped films. And not to in an effort to sort of copy this, of course, but sci-fi is my, it's my jam. I like sci-fi, and I like the sort of high concept sci-fi and things like that. So it'd be so good to see more. I think to the betterment of society, less cape stuff would be good.
Mm-hmm. No, I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree with you. I'd love to see many, many more of these films, as long as they keep the same director and cinematographer, whoever did the cinematography.
I think it was Greg Freezer.
I've heard the name. Yeah. So
Uh,
whoever sort of the top dogs in charge of writing, directing, cinematography, if it's the same team or most of the same team, bloody make 10 of them, please. Yes, please. One thing I'd say.
Greg Fraser. It was Greg Fraser.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Well, he's a master of his genre. Absolutely looks
Same guy
brilliant.
on
Brilliant.
2049.
Yeah.
Blade
Looks
Runner
brilliant.
2049, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought that looked brilliant. I thought that was written very well. The story was great. I was hooked essentially. Hardly anything to criticize it for. So yeah, I would love to see many more Dune films. I'd like to see more sort of very, very good sci-fi. One thing I would say
Mm.
about that though is I've read lots of sci-fi in my time. Lots and lots of all sorts of things. Philip K. Dick, Asimov, loads of stuff. Lots and lots of, I would say, I don't know, dozens of top drawer sci-fi, like the most famous sci-fi novels. I downloaded a thing years ago. Must be 15, maybe 20 years ago. It was someone had got together the top 10, top 100 sci-fi novels on
Oh, wow.
audiobook. And I listened to well over half of those right off the bat.
Mm.
Anyway, as I said right at the beginning, for me, and Dune was number 2 on that particular list. And most lists you
Interesting.
look up, Dune, the first Dune novel, is right at the top in top 10 in
Mm.
most people's lists. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is, there's a relatively small bracket of source material that is of Dune quality.
Yeah, yeah.
You go down to sort of the top 20, top 50 sci-fi novels, and they're not as good.
Yeah.
They're not as good. The thing about sci-fi, I don't know if you agree with me on this, but this is my feeling on the matter, is that the best sci-fi is stuff where it doesn't confuse you too much. So in
Mm.
Dune, for example, he'll come out with a completely fictional thing, a completely fictional name for something and concept of something. And it's pretty much self-explanatory. It's almost
Mm.
self-explanatory. Lots of sci-fi, they don't do that. They keep things they keep you off-footed. Philip K. Dick does that massively. He'll reference something again, again, and again, and it's not clear what it is, and he doesn't explain it.
Yeah,
Some
yeah, yeah.
some people love that. It makes them feel clever. I don't really like that.
Mm.
I like sci-fi that's a bit slightly on the easier to grasp level of the spectrum. I think most people do. You don't want to be confused right up until the last page of the book, and then you remain confused forever. Some people
Yeah, I
like
think
that. I
yeah.
don't. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think sci-fi works best when it present, and movies work best in sci-fi and other sort of formats as well, when they present a world which is easily accessible, and you can still present things which are futuristic or just out there, fantastical, but it has to be done in a way which is has a certain air of uh, tangibility or accessibility to the viewer or the reader. So you have to be able to go, well, this is what it is because it is, right? Too many people try to explain too many things. Like, I mean, the Mentats, for instance, you know, human computer, like it's pretty, it's pretty quick. Like it's not like overwinded. They take a sort of an energy drink type substance as well. Cool. Like that's the sort of as much understanding as you
Or they're
realistically
a
need.
spy master. You just mentioned once that they're a spy master. It's like, okay, got it, go. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
Yeah, stuff like that. But
Mm,
the concept can still be very science fiction,
mm,
but in an accessible format. So, I mean, that goes right the way across the board. I mean, even Terminator, for instance, and Alien and things like this. It's like, oh, well, this is this. You're like, oh, okay, fine. Deep Space Miners. Oh, okay, cool. It's like a lot of things. A lot of movies tend to have plot holes, but it's whether the movie is entertaining enough for you to overlook those plot holes. And it's the same concept with sci-fi, in the regard that it has to be entertaining, accessible enough. Most things have plot holes, but it's whether it presents itself in a way where you can go start to pick it apart. You
mm,
become confused with it, and you get to think too much about it. I guess it sounds almost a bit ignorant, like you want a film that doesn't make you think, but I don't want to think about the minutiae of why that character is doing,
mm,
where he trained to get this weird skill or stuff like that's irrelevant to my enjoyment of who he is and sort of his sort of function in this universe.
mm.
So yeah, I'd agree with you basically.
There's a balance to be struck, of course, because I and you and people like Drinker and most people that have got a brain in their head, we all complain that
Mm.
modern TV and movies are too dumb, and they dumb down
Oh
and they
yeah.
tell, don't show, and it's all pretty dumb. Okay,
Mm.
and something like Dune 2 is good because it's not that.
Mm.
And so what I was saying, and you were agreeing with me, I think, was that you can go too far the other way, and sci-fi sometimes does. Who
Mm.
was it? I was listening to an audiobook of something just the other day, and it was oh god, I can't remember who it was, but it was extremely difficult, and they were throwing out name after name of fictional things that they just made up, uh, and concept after concept after concept, and
Mm.
maybe it would be explained further in the novel, but it got to such a point where it was like it's like this book is for people that want to be confused,
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
want to be off. Yeah. Anyway, sci-fi is one of
It's a
those.
fine balance to
Yeah,
strike
yeah,
between
yeah.
presenting an intelligently worked world with concepts which are mature and sort of future, in a futuristic setting, and imaginative and new and rather than sort of cliche and stuff which we've seen time and time again, versus just I guess it's that nuance, isn't it? It's the nuance between being able to present that, accessible, nice, enjoyable, etc., versus someone who they sort of indulge themselves on.
Self-indulgent. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it is, isn't it? It becomes the universe itself is the story universe, and the sort of minutia. It becomes a self-indulgent sort of thrill ride rather than the story itself. Maybe that makes sense or doesn't,
yeah.
but
No, it does. Yeah, a lot of some sci-fi writers are very self-indulgent. Yeah, yeah, they can be,
mm,
and so that's what I would say that Frank Herbert and June, for me, for most people, nearly everyone that's ever read it, that balance is struck perfectly.
mm,
You know that you are in the hands of a master storyteller, a
mm,
master writer, I can't I can't really
Well, I'll
praise
tell you a great
Dune
example.
one enough. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I'll tell you a great example, right, of someone who could have been very self-indulgent, was in his personal life upon manufacturing the world. It's not sci-fi, but it's a great example, actually, to try and sort of, explain my sort of thinking on it all, is Tolkien. So Tolkien, incredible storyteller, but also someone that enjoyed the minutiae. He famously created the languages.
Mm,
He
mm.
actually had created the languages that he used in his worlds, created maps, everything. So he knew it inside out, which is great for him when he's fashioning the stories. But it's almost like when you and so that worked perfectly because the stories itself, he knew his universe inside and out. So when he came to write the stories, the viewer, the reader, could go along with it in such a way where they believe it because it was so fleshed out nicely. But it's almost as if the sci-fi writers that become too indulgent, they're trying to get you. They're almost fashioning the world as they're writing it along, as opposed to establishing the world beforehand. Or yeah.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Arthur C. Clarke is a very great, again, one of the most famous of all
Mm,
time. Nearly everyone agrees Arthur C. Clarke was a genius and master. But he's
mm,
very good. I would say someone like Arthur C. Clarke or Frank Herbert. It's a page turner. You
mm.
won't be bored. You won't be sort of wondering, oh, how long is this scene going to go on for, or anything like that. Because I've actually, it's crazy for me to say to criticize a master like Tolkien. However, I'm going to. The, have you ever actually read the Lord of the Rings novels?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I have. Yeah,
They're long-winded.
they are, and they
They're
weirdly slow
long-winded.
down in certain parts as well.
They are great, and of course he's a master. And who am I,
Yeah.
some peon, to criticize the great Tolkien? A master linguist, a
Mm,
scholar, a master scholar. But they are long winded. I first tried to read the first Lord of the Rings book when I was quite young. I was like
mm.
13 or something. I couldn't do it. It was too much. It was over my head. It was too long. I had to wait. I was in my early 20s before I picked it up again and could do it. If you know what I mean.
Mm.
When people claim, "Oh, I read Lord of the Rings when I was 10," no, you didn't.
Yeah,
No, you
yeah,
didn't.
yeah,
You were. I doubt you were able to. They're extremely long-winded and quite difficult and complex.
yeah.
They're really adult books, to be perfectly
Mm.
honest. And for vast swathes of the Lord of the Ring books, it's not what I would call a page turner. It's
Yeah, I
going
agree with
back
that.
and back
I
and
would
back
agree.
into more and more detail about things. Well,
Mm,
something like Rendezvous with Rama or Dune, you will be gripped if you're any sort of reader.
mm.
If you've got any sort of imagination, you will be gripped and you won't be able to put it down. That's anyway. That's my
So
thoughts
strong,
on it.
strong recommendation for the book
Mm, mm,
is the take home.
absolutely.
Yeah, I will defend Lord of the Rings and say long winded, but still a bit of a page turner for me. I enjoyed it very much
Oh
back
no,
back in the day.
just to be clear, they're great. They're nine and a half out of 10 books, of course.
Yeah.
They're not really they're not children's books. The
Oh
Hobbit
God,
is
no.
something different.
Jeez.
The Hobbit is something different. The Hobbit was one of the first books I ever read, actually,
Mm,
completely on my own,
yeah.
sort of a grown up book. When I
Mm,
was about
yeah.
10 or something, or 11 or something, a full book from cover to cover, all on my own, was The Hobbit, right? Because that is a page turner. The Hobbit is absolutely a
Mm,
page turner. It's
yeah.
if anyone out there, no matter how old you are, if you haven't read The Hobbit, read it, please.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
life will be
Second that.
richer.
Yeah. Second that. Second that. Well, I think that's. I think that just anything further to add. I guess
No, I
in the
just
world of
hope we've
Dune.
been able to do it some justice. Both the novel, the 1984 version, and the
We didn't
2020s
talk about the '84
versions.
version that much,
Not
actually.
all
To be
that
honest,
much.
but
No, no. I mean,
no.
the modern ones are better.
Oh, they eclipse it
Yeah,
by a
yeah,
country mile.
absolutely
My
eclipse it.
God.
One last
Yeah.
thing I would say, which I have already said, so I'm repeating myself, but if you haven't read the book or seen the films, and you're that way inclined, please, please, please do read the book first, or listen to it as an audiobook,
Mm,
then watch the films. The films will be 100 times richer for you if you do it that way round.
mm. Yeah. Well, I would say one tiny defense with the 84 version, because I mean, definitely the newer ones are substantially more than even tenfold better. But I would say I do enjoy the 84 one for what it is, and the use of miniatures will always have a special place in my heart.
Hmm.
Love the use of miniatures; they were so good. Although the giant pixelated sort of force field that they generate, nah, not so good. Much preferred the new version.
And it's got Sting in it. What's not to like about
This
Sting?
is true.
Seeing Sting as the Nar Baron. Again, if you read the book first, the 1984 version will be pretty good, certainly worth watching. If you
Mm.
don't, it will be weird and won't make sense, and you probably won't like the Dune universe all that much. That's the difference it will make, I think.
Yeah, I would say watch. Yeah, watch the new ones first. Read the book as well, of course. Once you've done all of that, then go back and watch the
Right.
84 one
Yeah. Only
for a
then.
more curiosity, because it's
Mm.
it's interesting. It's interesting of its time, and it's interesting. So
Mm. Mm.
yeah, that would be my advice.
All right.
Right,
Hopefully,
cool.
we've done it justice.
I think so.